Hello, my loves, and welcome back to Strange Playgrounds, and welcome back to, I believe it's part 3 of my Narnia retrospective. Now, this one is a pain in the arse. This one is phenomenally problematic. I know I said it at the end of the last video that I was going to be doing Prince Caspian next. I thought that was the next book because that's how it's generally promoted in almost all of the adaptations, in popular culture, in any list of the books that you find, any documentary on them, you will find the Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe leaping directly to Prince Caspian. Nobody ever talks about this book, the book that is actually the third book in the Chronicles of Narnia. In fact, even people who know the books rather well, who enjoy them, sometimes don't even know this book exists. There are not just 6 Chronicles of Narnia, there are 7. And this is the third book. This is The Horse and His Boy. And there's a reason why nobody talks about it. There's a reason why there are no adaptations of it. It's phenomenally problematic, this book. To put it politely, it's phenomenally problematic. If I were not being polite, I would say that it's hideously bloody racist, which it is. And I don't mean that in any kind of over-exaggerated or euphemistic way. It is overtly racist. It is racist in the sense that even people who actively define as, say, nationalistic, right-wing, maybe even white supremacists would look at it and say, yes, it's bloody racist. It is not only racist in terms of some of the language it uses, the concepts, the subjects, the stereotypes it provides, but it's also racist in terms of intent. Lewis's agenda is very much to the fore in this book, in the sense that it has not only ideological intentions for its reader, i.e. it wants them to basically bend over and accept Lewis's particular form of Christianity. It also commingles that factor with a fairly overt racism with regards to Arabic peoples, Arabic cultures, Middle Eastern traditions, and so on and so forth. It's basically Lewis doing his anti-Islamic tract. That's what this is. But he has confused Islam with almost every culture in the Middle East, basically. And what you get is this really weird stereotyped hodgepodge of cultures and traditions and images that, you know, cartoon makers from the 1940s would basically turn their noses up at in disgust. It's phenomenally problematic. The book is largely set in Calormene, which is the Narnian equivalent of. Basically, it's just like the East. There's no distinction between any particular culture or anything like that. Like, Lewis doesn't distinguish between images that are more redolent of, say, certain forms of Sikhism or of Buddhism and Islam. He just sort of throws them all together, nor does he distinguish between more cultural artifacts or iconography. He just takes stereotypes and caricatures of the East and just throws them together in this big hodgepodge. It's a bit like Agrabah from Disney's Aladdin, you know, but much more pronounced. It's pretty damn hideous. The way he paints these cultures is as though everyone from them is cruel and petty and lazy and ugly as well. There are constant references throughout the book to how the Narnians are incredibly beautiful in comparison to the people who are from Calormene, who are dark of face and are bitten and are miserable and sunken looking. White is what he means. Basically, he uses Narnian as a kind of a euphemism for white. That's what it means. The book even focuses. The protagonist is a boy called Shasta, who is an orphan, who is the adoptee of a Calormene fisherman, and Shasta is from Narnia, and so Shasta is okay. Even though he's grown up in this culture, even though he is technically a part of it, Shasta's okay because he's from Narnia. So he has all of these enlightened qualities as a result of his blood, not because of any cultural input or anything like that. No, that doesn't matter. He is automatically better than the people around him because he is of Narnian blood. There is this really covert and unpleasant genetic supremacy and cultural supremacy in this book that's really, really bloody horrible. Everyone from Calamine is cruel, they are petty, they are vicious and lazy and unpleasant, whereas everyone from Narnia, it's this weird thing where the book tries to tell you, it tells you overtly as the reader that the people from Narnia are automatically purer, more beautiful, more enlightened, and so on and so forth, and yet the way they act contradicts that. Let me give you an example. There's a point in the book where Shasta is mistaken for this prince, who it turns out he's the brother of. The story is basically Shakespearean, it's almost a kind of fantasy farce in a way about like missing heirs and lost twins and all of that kind of thing. It has an almost like a Shakespearean and slightly Wildian quality to the story, where there are these farcical circumstances that occur. I suppose you could even call it Dickensian, because it does have that quality to it too. And the story is not that much of a problem. The story's pretty good. I will say that the story is, because it has these influences, because it echoes these farcical situations, it actually works rather well. It is entertaining and it hurtles along, and it would be very easy to adapt, it would be phenomenally easy to adapt, actually, because there's not much here that would be problematic. Most of the big magical sort of effects-driven stuff in the Chronicles of The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe isn't here. Most of the characters are human or humanoid, so there's no problem there. Even the more fantastical beasts, like the talking horses, which are a key part of this book, are just horses. They're not that difficult to render in like TV or film format. The reason nobody ever has, even in the 1980s, which was 1980s TV was phenomenal racist in many respects. Even in the 1980s, they passed this one over, and I can imagine there were people at the BBC after the success of The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe saying, "We can't do this. We cannot do this one. It will cause uproar." So they moved straight on to Prince Caspian. But what happens is Shasta is mistaken for the prince, who you later find out is his brother, by Edmund. It's actually Edmund from The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, a little bit grown up. He's actually a young man now, and he's spotted and he's grabbed. And the book says, Edmund hits him, but only lightly. Nothing like the fisherman who was his foster father used to do. So that's all right. I mean, like, well, however which way you argue it, it's violence. I mean, the guy's hitting a child. I mean, fucking hell. But the Narnians are much better. They're much more enlightened. They're much more beautiful, so it doesn't matter. Another thing you keep getting in this book, the characters from Narnia keep saying, "I'm a free Narnian, and I will say and do what I want," and blah, blah, blah. Despite the fact that they're actually in Calamine. They're actually guests in the Calamine Empire. And they keep saying things like, "I'm a free Narnian." And they keep using this term, free Narnian. No one in Narnia is free. No one in Narnia is free. It's so hypocritical. The structure of culture and government in Calamine is always portrayed as though it's awful and horrible. And don't get me wrong, it is awful and horrible, but it's no more or less awful and horrible than Narnia. In Calamine, you have these ruling families who inherit their influence and their power. In Narnia, no one is free because you have divinely appointed kings and queens. You can't call yourself. You can't just keep saying that you're free when you have to constantly bow and scrape and do as you're told by kings and queens who are just divinely appointed, because Aslan says they have to be kings or queens. It's so fucking hypocritical, and it's one of those. The book is actually infuriating because you keep getting the characters keep insisting upon this. They keep using that term, free Narnian. I'm a free Narnian, and it's like it breaks the fiction more than anything else, beyond whatever ideological problems the book has. It breaks the fiction because you can actually hear Lewis's voice coming through. You can hear Lewis's agenda coming through. They're not talking to one another, they're talking to the reader. And that's a real problem. It breaks the story. It takes you out of the fiction because Lewis wants you to feel this particular way and that particular way, and he wants to program you with this particular agenda and this ideology. It's awful. Not only that, Lewis clearly doesn't have much of an idea of how Middle Eastern cultures in general function. He relies upon caricatures and cartoon stereotypes and almost like propagandist, like racist right-wing propagandist caricatures of Middle Eastern characters and Middle Eastern people and cultures. You even get descriptions of things like, and it's cringeworthy. It's fucking cringeworthy. Like characters who have like all of these ornaments in their beards, and they have like curled up slippers that they wear, and they wear turbans despite there's no reason for them to wear turbans. Is that, you know, this is not a Sikh world. It's just weird. It's just fucking weird. The whole book is rife with this stuff, and it's profound. It just completely undermines the whole story, because the whole point of the story is to draw this distinction between the filthy, dirty Calamines and the white Western Narnians. You know, it's pretty awful. Now, one of the I anticipate one of the lashbacks to my calling the book racist, which is you will inevitably get people out there who say things like, "Oh well, it's of its time," or "You can't judge Lewis by the standards of today." That's such a facile argument, and not only that, the people who make it never sit down and think about it, do they? They never sit down and actually think about what they're saying. If that's true, if you think that's morally acceptable, then there were periods in history when rape was perfectly okay and you can't judge people for it because that was the standards of the time. When child abuse was perfectly okay because that was the standards of the time. There are cultures that exist now who are going through particular evolution, like cultural evolutions or historical situations where things like child brides and prescribed marriages and whatnot, perfectly morally okay because that's the point in their history that they're at. Those are the standards. You can't say on the one hand that it's okay here and that it's not okay there, okay? Not only that, but when you look back at these eras and periods, there were thinkers and there were scholars and there were philosophers decrying things like racism and whatnot. Even Lewis's contemporary does it. I mean, Tolkien is sometimes accused of being racist in his works, and that is true. There is a degree of racism there. But what Tolkien does, he countermands it quite cleverly. There are scenes in The Lord of the Rings where Frodo encounters the Easterlings and the Southrons, these sort of like Middle Eastern and African cultures that worship Sauron and are set against the men of the West, you know, which is, yeah, it's a racist dynamic, totally. But you do get these situations where the characters look at their enemies and their victims and say things like, you know, I wonder who they were. Who was this person before I fought him, before I saw him die? Was he a fisherman? Did he have a family? It tries to humanize the characters rather than demonize them, whereas Lewis does entirely the opposite. It's a facile argument. It's something I really hate to hear. Oh, you can't judge overt racism by the standards of today. Yes, you fucking can. Yes, you fucking can. In the same way you can judge things like institutionalized rape and child abuse by the standards of today. Otherwise, they're either wrong or they're not wrong. Yeah? They're either wrong or they're not wrong. Take your pick. Take your pick. And as I say, when you look at other cultures that are concurrently existing, where these things are still standardized, because those cultures are still going through particular cultural revolutions and periods of their history, if you use that argument, then you can't say that they are wrong or morally reprehensible in those cultures as they stand, because maybe they won't be in the future, and then maybe they'll look back and say exactly the same thing, yeah? You can't use that argument. It was reprehensible then, it's reprehensible now. It's even more reprehensible given that it was aimed at children, you know? This is a really terrible book on many levels, It's unlike Lewis's other stuff, which is largely metaphysical or religious bigotry that you get. This is actually that and lots of other stuff intermingled. It's cultural supremacy, it's imperialism, it's basically white Westerners rampaging across the land, doing whatever the fuck they think they can, whatever they like, whatever the hell they like, regardless of cultural norms. and just automatically assuming their own superiority, despite the fact that when you scratch the surface, the Narnians exhibit exactly the same barbarities and problems that the Calormenes do. It's just that it's disguised. The characters just tell you, they try to insist that they're not, that they're better when they aren't. And it makes it pretty awful. Another thing that's pretty damn awful in this book is Aslan. Aslan turns up in this book, and if anything, in this book, he is at his most bloody capricious and his most bafflingly mercurial. There's a point in the book where Shasta and Bree, the talking horse, are chased by a lion across a plain that they're trying to escape through. They're trying to escape from Shasta's foster father through. And this lion chases them, and they're terrified. It chases them across a river. Later on, they are chased across a desert by lions. And Aslan later says something, when Shasta meets him, he says to Shasta, "Oh, I was that lion, and I was trying to direct you away from danger," or something bollocks like that. And I'm like, hang on, motherfucker, why didn't you just talk to him? Why did you scare him out of his wits and make him think that you were going to eat him messily? In fact, Shasta even anticipates the pain of being devoured. He sits there on the Bree's back and thinks, how painful will it be if I'm eaten by this lion? Why didn't you just talk to him? Not only that, you are omnipotent. If you thought he was going the wrong way, why didn't you just put him on the right track? Why did you even put him on the wrong track to begin with? Why didn't you just rearrange reality around him on a whim so that he's in the right place at the right time? It's so mercurial. The character Aslan, the more you read these books, the more of an absolute wanker he comes off as. He's the villain of these books. He's the author of all suffering in these books, you know? And the way he acts lacks logic, it lacks reason, it lacks rationality, you know? It's this deliberately mysterious, obfuscating, oh, I move in mysterious ways. Fuck you, Aslan. Quite frankly, fuck you. You don't move in mysterious ways, you're just cruel, you know? He is just a super-powered, omnipotent child, it seems, who likes to play with the living creatures that he's created as though they are toys. And in this book, it's made overt, it's made absolutely stark, and it's like, ooh, it's not nice. I can tell you that now. It is actually really, really troubling. It's really troubling. Do not like it at all. This is not the worst of them, though. The Horse and His Boy is not the worst of these books by a country mile. That status is reserved for the final book, The Last Battle, and we'll get to that when we go into it. Next, we will move on to Prince Caspian, which is slightly more sedate than this book and won't be such a bloody rant as this video. So, until then, ladies and gents, bye-bye!